Hi everyone, welcome to the latest volume of Drawn and Cornered. To celebrate this new season, we've partnered with Aftershock Comics to create a special limited edition variant cover for Undone by Blood or The Other Side of Eden #1 by legendary artist Francisco Francavilla. Check it out. There's only 500 of these covers and you can't buy it. That's right, but you can get it for free and all you have to do is subscribe to this channel and we'll be randomly sending them out to fans just like you. Hi everyone, for a Filthy Lot Entertainment, welcome to Drawn and Cornered. It's the show that corners today's best comic book artists as they draw incredible art while answering some fun deep dive questions. After the show, you can bid on the art and all the proceeds will go to our guest's charity of choice. So make sure you watch through to the end to see the final product. Our guest today is a seasoned comic book artist with hits over the past 2 decades that range from coveted superhero titles like Firestorm and Super Girl to cutting-edge creator-owned books like Black and The Wrong Earth. A refreshing political voice in the comic book industry coupled with his clean, classic art style that I've been a fan of for years. We couldn't be more excited to have Jamal Igle in the seat with us today. Welcome to the show, Jamal.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. It's a real pleasure having you here. Can you tell us what it is that you're going to draw today and what charity this is going to benefit?
Well, I think I was going to do something else, but I think I'm going to go classic. I'm going to do Superman. Because
nice.
Anybody who follows me online knows that I am, one of my favorite characters. So actually, probably my favorite character of all time. So, and then the artwork that I'm donating, the proceeds I would like to go to the Hero Initiative.
That's exciting. I can't wait to see what this looks like at the end. Is that sound coming from your end?
Yeah, that's my dog. He's that is the sound of his dog tags hitting the bowl. That's Gambino.
That's awesome. Like a lot of artists we've talked to, you've said in the past that it was from a pretty young age you wanted to draw comics. So what I wanted to ask was, what were the books and who were the artists that cemented that desire for you?
Well, pretty early, when I started reading comics, the first comic that I ever bought with my own money was Alpha Flight #12. And that wasn't the one that hooked me, to be honest. When I say that my love of Superman, it runs deep, it runs very, very deep. I used to watch The Adventures of Superman with my father and my grandfather back in the 70s when I was a kid, when I was really young. And then my grandfather took me to see Superman the movie, and that just sort of cemented it for me, like completely. So that pretty much was my go-to forever, like everything Superman related.
Mm-hmm.
I glommed onto movies, TV shows, toys, Super Friends, anything, So that was the beginning. And then when I started reading and buying books, I was reading a lot of DC at that point. Still do, actually. But I was also reading stuff like Alien Legion, and then when I got a little older, I was getting more into the indie stuff. So I was, big Dave Stevens fan of The Rocketeer, and then Nexus with Baron and Rude, and Boris the Bear, and then, I kind of think of myself as being sort of part of this spoiled generation of creators who came into the business. Because I was 14 when Ronin, Dark Knight, Watchmen, right around that time, Camelot 3000, Killing Joke, all the classic stuff, Destroy by Scott McCloud, Burns' run on Superman in Action, it was all within that period, that high school period. And then my best friend at the time was this kid named Lester, who was this huge Marvel fan, and I was a huge DC fan. So it, always came down to, who's stronger, what's the better team, X-Men or Justice League, who's cooler, Batman or Wolverine, it's always, those typical sort of, arguments that, kids have, except I think more kids have those arguments about like, Naruto, or who'd win a fight, Goku or Saitama from One Punch, so or what's his face from My Hero Academia, All Might. So I mean that was the stuff that I was really really into, high school especially. Like I was reading Ordway and Byrne, and I was reading Jerry Ordway was also a big early influence on me too, on Infinity Incorporated. So I used to devour his stuff.
So at what age did you start drawing?
Oh, I started drawing early. I started drawing when I was like 5 or 6 years old. So like I said, like as soon as I was really starting to get exposed to comics in particular, I was just hooked from that moment on. I say it jokingly, but it's actually really true, is that I knew what I wanted to do I knew I wanted to do comics almost immediately.
So what steps did you take to make being a professional comic artist a reality? And I understand you went to college for it, but before that, how were you building your skill set?
Well, I also, before I even got to the college level, I also went to, there's a school here in New York called the High School of Art and Design. And they were one of the few schools in the city and in the country at the time that had a comic book class, had a person teaching you how to draw comics. So the very first mentor that I had was a man named Charles Ferguson, who was a commercial illustrator who became a teacher. And he was the one who sort of, started me on the pro path. And then, the school itself is in Midtown Manhattan, and at the time was, a subway ride from Marvel's offices, and, looked basically like, half a mile from DC's offices. So we would cut school and go on the Marvel tour. And so that was the intro, that was, when I say comics, like I, slept comics all the time. Everything was comics and superheroes, and Superman in particular, just whatever I could get my hands on. And then while I was at Art and Design, New York also has a program that they do. It's called the City School Executive Internship Program. So they offer internships to high school students. And at the time, Marvel, and they I don't know if they do it for high school students, or at least right now they're not doing it because of the pandemic, but Marvel, DC, and King Features used to offer internships to high school students. So I interviewed for Marvel, and it felt too corporate for me. And then I went on the DC interview, and the place was pure chaos. Like there was, paper all over the place, and people running around like, there were, chickens on fire. And I looked around, I said, I'm home. So I did the, it's just like anything else. I had to put together a portfolio to show, I had to interview. they told me to call back in a couple of hours. I never made it to the King Features interview because DC offered me the spy, the interview, the internship.
That's awesome.
So I did a 6-month internship at DC during my senior year of high school. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah, so that was that. Those were the things that sort of started me on the path, and then and then after that, like I went to college. I dropped out of college. I went to Canada. I came back. I started working at Jim Haley's Universe, and I worked there for about a year. And then right after that, I started getting my first professional work back in the early 90s for a company called Majestic Entertainment, which most people don't remember. But it was one of these companies that did these collectible card comics.
Mm-hmm.
And it lasted about, I would say it probably lasted about a year because the company filed Chapter 11 and the owners embezzled all the money.
Man.
The parent company was a sports card company. So they based out of Cleveland. And at the time, Paul Jenkins had just left Tundra to be the editor-in-chief of Majestic. And they screwed him. They screwed us all, but they really break Paul over the coals. But Paul Jenks was a good dude, and tried to look out for me a little bit, and, but after that fell apart, I took the pages that I did for Majestic, and I used them as my portfolio to try and get work at other companies. And that's how I got my first DC work as an artist.
Oh, amazing. Silver linings.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, one thing that you said in the past, and I think it's kind of interesting and important, is that you're not just a fan of comic book art, but a fan of fine art, film, television, and theater, and that everyone you speak to inspires you in some way. Now, if we're not talking about specific inspirations, can you talk about why it's key to your process to draw from a variety of sources?
Well, I had it impressed on me very early on in my education that the best thing that you could be in this world was an observer, to be a student of human nature, a student of the earth, to take in everything as much as you can and learn to filter it through your own experiences, because we all come from the same sort of milieu. We all come from the same basic stuff. Our experiences shape who we are, but essentially we're all human beings. So in the whole idea of me as a student of the world, and letting that seep into what I do, is that I'm not just looking at limited sources for inspiration. A lot of times, especially with younger artists, they tend to only want to look at the thing that inspires them directly. If you're a fan of comics, you tend not to want to look at anything else but comics as an inspiration, because you don't see it as directly applying to what you do per se. You know what I mean? So you have to kind of shake yourself out of that space, out of that thinking, because it's very limited thinking, but it takes time to come to that realization. You can probably see my shelf. I mean, the stuff that I have on my shelf, I've got like the illustrated guide to forensics. I've got books on astronomy, police equipment, animals. I've got book on concept cars. And this is just the stuff that I keep right here at hand. This is the inspiration, but I also have reference for the figure, not just artistic reference, but I have like books on dance, I have books on martial arts. I have one of my favorite books. It's The Way of the Warrior.
Nice.
Here, which is an encyclopedia of martial arts from around the world. I also have this is a good one. The Special Forces Guide to Escape and Evasion. So, everything can be an inspiration.
Now, as you mentioned, you started working as an intern at DC. I think you were 17 years old.
Yes.
And you talked about the chaos. DC was obviously in chaos at the time. Can you tell me what that experience was like? Was it all that you hoped for, or was it kind of like a peek behind the curtain, kind of sobering in any sense?
It was, it was a very interesting time, because we're talking about 1989, 1990. So this was, they're prepping for the release of Batman. Mm-hmm. They just introduced a new Robin. Justice League is one of the biggest selling. It's the DeMatteis, Giffen, Kevin McGuire, Adam Hughes era of Justice League. So they're kind of like, this is post Legends, so there was all of this stuff that was happening, and I was just enamored. I loved going into that office. I loved hanging out in production, because I learned to ink with a brush. I got the basics of color. I learned how to shoot photo stats. I was learning the basics of production, and then in the afternoons I would help out in editorial. So, and a lot of my helping out in editorial really was, it wasn't like hands-on as it was in production per se. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But I got to be in on some of the meetings and see some of the decisions, and and it was eye-opening. Just to, I think what it did more than anything else, it wiped away sort of the mythic end of what I thought comics and producing comics was about. And then you realize, hey, it's not just, it's a business, it's a job. You have deadlines, you have all of these targets that you have to hit. If you got to deal with creators who aren't calling you back, but you're waiting for pages that need to go to the printer. You got to deal with printers. You got to deal with the sales department. You got to figure out, what's, XYZ didn't hit. What are we going to do? How are we going to shape this book up? Do I keep this guy? Do I fire this guy? There's just all these things, all these decisions, all these, that you're not, before that point, I wasn't fully aware of, and I gained a healthy respect for the editorial process. But I also gained a healthy respect for the other aspects of production that I wasn't as familiar with at the time. And it was a much different, in a lot of ways, there's a much different industry than it is now. Back, we're talking, 1989, 1990. So we're just not even really getting into computer coloring or production yet. 90% of everything is being done by hand. So you're on the crest of this whole big turnover in the industry.
Now, your first big break with comics was the New Warriors at Marvel. How did that come to be? How did you read the initial run on the title? And were you a fan of it, more importantly? Or was it just a job that you just couldn't pass up?
I was doing samples. I had gotten into this groove where I was doing samples every week, mm-hmm. and sending them out to all the editors that I knew at the time. So I would do a bunch of samples and I would send them out, and I'd either get notes or, somebody would give me a call and say, we'll keep you in mind for X, Y, and Z, but it never felt like anything was happening.
Right.
But one of those sets of samples ended up in the hands of Greg Schiegel, another artist, but he was an assistant editor at Marvel at the time. and they were Nightwing samples that I did. And he had held on to them. And when they were looking for an artist for New Warriors, he gave them to Bobby Chase, who was the editor on New Warriors at the time, and on the Iron Man books. So I'm working at Sony, and my art rep at the time, a guy named Dave Olbrich, calls me at work, and he says, I just got a call from Marvel, and they want to talk to you. So I was
all
like,
right.
Okay, I'll call. They gave me Bobby's number, and I called Bobby, and I said, so hey, what's going on? She says, well, I still don't have an artist for New Warriors. So that's how I got the job.
There you go. And the rest is history.
The rest is history. I mean, I was a fan of the original run. And I was very familiar with the original run, and I didn't know that they had started a new series.
Mm-hmm. Because you jumped on at like issue 7, right?
Yeah, I was supposed to jump on with issue 6, but I couldn't. I couldn't leave. I couldn't immediately jump on because I was still working at Sony at the time, so I had to leave Sony to go to work on New Warriors, which was causing me all sorts of agita.
And did you have to move back to New York for that, or were you still in?
No, I stayed in LA for another year. I had been out there for about 6 months at that point. I stayed in LA for another year. But that was the thing. Like I went and did New Warriors, and it actually the two good things that came out of it was I really did enjoy working on it. And it allowed me to get to know Jay Ferber, who I worked with. We co-created Venture together over at Image afterwards, and we worked on his Noble Causes series. And he's still a friend of mine. Like we're still good friends. So I mean that was the big thing. Like it was a great working experience. But at the same time, it was the first time in a very long time that I had to produce monthly work. So I was working constantly, which was good at the time because I was single. So
right.
So I could afford to sleep 4 hours a night and
right
all day.
Now you worked on a lot of big 2 characters, everyone from Supergirl to Firestorm. Mm-hmm. But do you feel like there's one book people always remember you most for? And if so, what do you think it is?
Well, I joked to my wife that they're going to put the phrase "Jamal put shorts on Supergirl" on my grave. So,
right.
So I think more than anything else, that's the book that most people know my work from is Supergirl, which is which is really funny at this stage because it's been over 10 years since I left the book. But
sure, yeah,
it's the fact that people still seem to appreciate what we were trying to do, what Sterling and I were trying to do. It's not lost on me. It really isn't.
What were the shorts that controversial? I don't know. I don't remember.
Oh yeah.
Really?
It was a big deal. It wasn't supposed to be, but it ended up being.
All right.
What had happened was the first meeting that I had with Matt Idelson, who was the editor on Supergirl at the time. I'd already been working at DC for a couple of years at that point. And I was working on this Tangent Superman's Reign miniseries, and really, having fun with it. It was 17-page stories. I could take a little bit of extra time. I was having a lot of fun. It was my first opportunity to draw a lot of the Justice League characters.
Right.
And when Matt offered me the book, and I went to meet with him at the office, the first thing he said to me was, "I never want to see Supergirl's panties again."
Right.
Okay, cool. And what ended up happening was, well, one of the things that Matt told me when I got the assignment was, don't bother reading the other issues, which I promptly ignored. But, I before I even started really kind of formulating what I wanted to do visually, I had got the trades. And one day my mom was here with my wife and with one of my nieces, and I showed my mother the book up until that point. Mm-hmm. And my mother looks at me and goes, "She looks like a hooker." and I kind of laughed it off a little bit, but it honestly, it helped me sort of figure out what I wanted to do and the take that I wanted to have for Kara, which was, to kind of normalize her a little bit more than she had been previously drawn. Yeah. And putting the shorts on was almost an afterthought, to be honest. It was almost sort of like, kind of makes sense. And here's the thing. Okay, so here's the big part about this. Yeah. So they weren't separate shorts, or they weren't designed to be separate shorts. No. It was a skort. It was a skirt-short combination. What happened was Nia Rufino, who was the colorist on the book, had colored the shorts, the leggings section blue instead of red, like the skirt. Mm-hmm. So somebody noticed it. And when I was at Heroes Con in Charlotte, North Carolina, I'm probably like 4 issues into working on the book. Yeah. And a woman stands up during a panel and she says, "Thank you for putting shorts on Supergirl." I was like, okay, that's fine. Thank you. And then Matt Brady, who was a writer at Newsarama, asked to do a quick interview about it. So I did this, what I thought was a quick sort of, off the cuff interview that ended up getting picked up by NPR. Right. And then all of these feminist blogs, and then everybody wanted to do interviews, and it became a thing.
Oh man, it seems so crazy to me because I'm flipping through the book right now. Mm-hmm. I have it in my hands right now, right. And you very rarely see the shorts in most cases, right? I mean,
that's the point.
There's still the skirt there, and if it wasn't the skirt, then it would, again, I guess you would say it would be the panties, right?
Right.
I don't see it as a big deal. It's kind of crazy to me how that was such a big deal.
Well, at the time, especially, considering there was a bit of backlash because this was before they put, they had the Wonder Woman thing where they put pants on her for a while, and people were saying, well, if you could do this for Supergirl, why can't you do this for other characters? Why can't you desexualize, other characters? And, DC really didn't have an answer for it at the time. Mm-hmm. But the other half of it was Sterling and I started getting attacked by men for desexualizing Supergirl and making her...
How dare you!
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. There was a guy you could it's the website is still online. There's a guy who started a disgruntled Supergirl fan website.
Come on now.
I'm serious. It's still up.
I'm gonna look this up. Disgruntled Supergirl?
Disgruntled Supergirl fan.
Disgruntled Supergirl fan. Here we go. Yep. Oh my. All right. This guy must have a lot of time on his hands.
He did. I don't know. He sort of disappeared, but he
I love it. He has a page here called Acceptable Solutions.
Yes.
It's like, what? All right. This is crazy. At least you can put nipples on the batsuit. I mean, come on. People got to get over this sort of stuff. I mean, gosh, still wearing a skirt. Get over it.
Oh, but we were misandrous. we were, anti-male. There was nothing wrong with her costume before. It's no sexier than a cheerleader's outfit. Blah blah blah. So it became a thing.
Wow, that's insane. Now you were speaking of all your DC work. You were the first artist that we've had on this show that was part of the New 52 initiative. Mm-hmm. And it's something that not a lot of people talk about anymore, but it was a major turning point for superhero comics. It got a lot of readers back into the shops, and you worked on the Ray relaunch with Jimmy Palmiotti. Can you walk us through that? How did it feel to be part of that initiative?
It was weird, to be honest, because at the time, everything was being done on a need-to-know basis. Mm-hmm. So for months, there had been these like hush whispers in the offices about what they were planning and what they were doing, and like they were talking to bunches, like tons of writers, getting different pitches for things. I sort of came into it at the end of the process because I was working on Zatanna at the time,
right?
And that was wrapping up. And I literally walked into Joey Cavalieri's office. Joey was the editor on Zatanna, and like we were all just basically, especially those of us who were on exclusive contracts, we were all just basically, trying to figure out what we were doing next because we knew there was going to be this whole relaunch. And I go into Joey's office and I turn in the last pages, and I just kind of go, "So, what are you going to be working on?" And he looks at me and is like, "I don't know. What are you going to be working on?" And I'm just like, but it was the first time I got to work with Jimmy and Justin. It was the first time that I, other than Firestorm, like creating stuff for like Firestorm and Super Girl, it was the first time that I really had been given the keys to sort of completely rebuild a character from scratch. Mm-hmm. In this case, the initial design for Lucian Gates, our Ray, came out of me and Cully Hamner bouncing ideas back and forth over the course of a day, like just different combinations until we landed on something that everybody liked. So that's how that came together. And then I knew that the Ray was going to be my last project at DC under contract. So I just decided that I was just going to, try and blow the doors off. And I think I put more detail into that series than I put into probably anything else that I worked on at the time.
Mm-hmm. Now, aside from your superhero work, you've recently been best known for your series Black, published by Black Mask Studios. Now, this made huge waves when it first hit in 2017, and people still talk about it today. There's also been news of a potential adaptation. Can you talk about how that book came to be?
Oh, well, I am, when it comes to Black, I like to describe myself as I am Ringo to John and Paul. Black is the creation of Tim Smith and Kwanzaa Sajifo. Mm-hmm. So, and I met Kwanzaa when he was an editor at DC, and we worked together. He was my editor on the Ray miniseries. Mm-hmm. So that's how our relationship got started. And Kwanzaa called me. I knew Tim from the con circuit, and we were familiar with each other. And Kwanzaa called me up one day, and he says, "I've got this project that I was wondering if I could come over and talk to you about it." So he came over to my place, and he showed me in a graphic that it was just an image of the main character Kareem in a red hoodie, and the only thing it said is, "What if only Black people had superpowers?" And I was just like, "Damn it! I can't say no to this." Right,
yeah. And did you guys kickstart the initial issue?
Yes, we kickstarted Actually, we kickstarted both books. The first book, we were planning on raising $30,000, and we raised the initial $30,000 in 4 days.
Right. I think you raised like what, 90 grand in the end?
Yeah, for the first book, we raised 90 grand. I don't remember what we got for the second book, but it was substantial.
And how long was it before Black Mask got involved?
Black Mask Black Mask became the publisher after the fact. So I want to say probably it was within like maybe like a month or two after the campaign ended, because everybody came asking about Black at that point. Like everybody, every publisher wanted to publish the book after the Kickstarter success. So they decided to go with Black Mask because the social justice angle that a lot of Black Mask books have fits in with the general ideas that are presented in Black as a series. So
for sure, yeah. Now you also mentioned in the past that Black was also meant to be a three-part graphic novel series.
Yes.
Issue 6 came out, I think, 2 years ago. This last time we saw your work on that. Any idea when we might see more? When we might see the second story?
Yes, the second story is coming out next year. Actually, it is. They're finishing up the writing and the toning on it, but it's all 6 issues are completely drawn.
Oh, fantastic!
So I finished that before I started working on the new Wrongers miniseries.
Now, obviously, doing a timely book like this with a strong message that includes people of color at the forefront, sometimes you get haters, and this book did get quite a bit of that. How do you personally deal with those assholes? Does it ever get to you?
Does it ever get to me? Well, here's the thing. I've been dealing with people. I don't want to say guys specifically, but in general, I've been dealing with some version of that pretty much my entire career. I mean, the same kind of hate that I got, working on Black or even being connected to Black, we used to get when I was working on Firestorm over at DC. There are just some corners that are just, they're afraid of change. They're afraid of the status quo being shaken up, and they can't admit that to themselves. They can't admit that whatever racist or bigoted feelings they have are being driven out of fear. They try to hide it behind just dumb stuff. Dumb stuff like basically social Darwinism.
I remember reading a comment somewhere saying it's like, what about white people? Why can't white people have superpowers? I'm like, look, man, white people have had superpowers for 80 years in the comic book industry.
I used to, my go-to answer whenever somebody would say, what if I created a book where all, everybody had, all the people who got powers were white? What would you call it? And I said, you'd call it the Fantastic Four.
Right, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, Fantastic Four, exactly. Absolutely right. Your latest book is The Wrong Earth, and it's from Ahoy Comics. It's another superhero comic, both satirical and sincere in its approach to the genre. Now, first off, what's it like working with Ahoy? They're kind of new, but really seem to have their heads and hearts in the right places. And this is also a Kickstarted book, is that right or no?
No. Ahoy is self-financed. So they started internally and they are built internally, and they are Ahoy. Working for Ahoy is probably one of the best experiences that I've had in a very long career.
Okay, cool.
And it's just a lot of it is really due to being able to work with Tom Pyre, who's just a good guy, and makes me seem conservative in a lot of ways. And I'm kind of lefty. Tom is super lefty. So, but No, but it's, working with Ahoy it's great. It's there's freedom in working on your own characters and your own properties, and then, having knowing that the financial support for the line is there helps a lot too.
Oh, for sure.
So and just again, a company run by people who, even though it's a new company, you're talking about a company that's run by people with, decades of experience, who just want to put out stuff that makes them laugh, stuff that tickles them. They're not trying to cater to market forces or whatever they think is cool. They're working with creators that they want to work with. They're doing stuff that they want to do, and everybody aspires to be able to do that. It's very cool to be able to work with a company that is able to do that. So,
right, absolutely, yeah. It must have been also kind of exciting to have your comic be the one that launches Ahoy in comic shops. You did an interview with Comics Journal a little while ago where you said that you spent 7 years in the belly of the beast. That's obviously referring to your licensed property gigs. Now, what did you feel that you learned from Marvel and DC that you either brought or left behind when you went to work on the creator-owned stuff like Black and the Wrong Earth?
Well, I think the biggest thing was that I learned to make a differentiation between what it is that I do now in general versus what you're doing when you're working for a larger corporate concern. So when you're working for Marvel and DC or any company of that scope, Valiant, Dark Horse, Image in some respects, it's not as much about creation as it is about brand management. You are a link in a chain, in a very long chain that will outlive you if you're very, very lucky in terms of the scope of the characters that you're dealing with. And a lot of the way that they get talent at a Marvel or a DC to be involved with them is the opportunity to work on these characters that we've grown up with. There's a lot of excitement in that. So, you have to behave accordingly. When you're following their rules, you're following their structure, unless they say, go nuts, you have to work within their parameters. Whereas opposed to when I'm doing my own stuff, it begins and ends with me. I'm the only person who I have to necessarily make happy.
Right. So
there's, it's different ways of dealing and there's different ways of thinking. And of how you approach the work. I mean, either way, like I can take a little bit more time on my own stuff because I don't have the same deadlines. Right. I'm not, under the monthly gun because we're producing things so far in advance. But, when you're working for a DC, for example, you're constantly having to crank stuff out. And sometimes you end up having to cut corners, even when you don't want to. It's just a part of it's part of the nature of the beast, unfortunately. It's just, there's no getting around it.
Now, superheroes and politics also go hand in hand, despite what some people say, and we won't name their names here. For you, though, what is it that allows this genre to stay fresh in its political commentary?
Well, honestly, superhero comics in particular are built out of left-wing politics, and there's just no way that you should ignore the history. It's an entire genre that was started by poor Jewish kids from the Lower East Side.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, there's no getting around that. The earliest Superman stories, for example, are him fighting dictators and slumlords. Right. The first issue of Captain America has him punching out Hitler. I mean, you can't ignore the, for lack of a better term, the Antifa origins, the anti-fascist origins of comic book superheroes. It's only later when, the post, Death Wish, 70s, 60s, 70s kind of, kung fu theater, revenge movie, horror movie genre spillover that sort of, shifted things towards, the anti-hero, as opposed to the socialist superhero who's doing the right thing for the sake of doing right and not doing it out of revenge, not doing it, mostly, a lot of times it's about revenge. Like almost every character that came out of like the 70s, if you think about like Iron Fist or Punisher, Wolverine, like they're all like thirsting for vengeance. Sometimes they don't know what they're avenging against,
I mean, New York in the 70s was a dark time.
Hey, I remember New York in the 70s. It was. It's funny. It's like my wife is French, grew up in Paris. My daughter, who is 12 and has lived in New York her entire life, and I try to tell them what New York. Like I remember the garbage strikes. I remember, somebody stole my Christmas tree when I was 6. I mean, that's how bad it was.
Yeah. Whenever someone asks me, it's like, oh, what do you think New York was like in the 70s? I just go watch The Warriors.
Oh, it wasn't. Well, okay. It wasn't that bad. I say if you really want a view of New York in the 70s, you either watch like The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. Okay.
The original one with Walter Matthau, or Fame.
Fame. Okay. Yeah.
Fame gives you a good idea of like late 70s, early 1980s New York and what it was like.
Now, as someone that's been on the inside of the comic industry for over 20 years, do you think that the comic books and the industry itself is more or less progressive than other entertainment industries?
Oh, that's a tough one. That really is. I would like to say yes, but I know a lot of people who would disagree with me. And I would say it's more progressive than it's been previously. But unfortunately, we're still. Here's the thing about. I don't want to say this about all comics because there are areas of the industry that are much more or becoming much more progressive because you have younger creators and more opportunities coming in. But a good portion of the superhero comic genre is still filtered through the view of straight white men. There's just no getting around that. And I hope for more true diversity coming down the line. I don't know if it's more diverse or more progressive than any other parts of the entertainment industry because we're so small in comparison. We kind of float on this microcosm in comparison.
Sure.
So, and sometimes it just feels like we take a few steps forward and then there's a backlash and then we end up falling back a step and then try and take more steps forward. If something really takes off, everybody tries to copy it, but it gets watered down.
Right. And
they're only taking the surface level of whatever it is that made it unique and whatever allowed for more people to become invested. I think now that, especially with graphic novels and trade paperbacks and manga being, such a force in comic book publishing, it allows for more opportunities for a more diverse medium.
Yeah, for sure. And I think even if the bigger publishers aren't stepping up to the plate with stuff like that, I love the fact that we live in a world now where we have things like Kickstarter and small press publishers that take risks on new voices that can get them out there as well. So I mean, there's always an opportunity for that to grow.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the great things about having, especially nowadays, you got companies like Action Lab and Alterna and Image and what's the Vault Comics, smaller companies that are able to take those kinds of risks. We wouldn't get a Magdalene Viziago if she hadn't been able to do Kim and Kim. And now, she's got her own, she had her own television series. She's writing for Marvel, and, she's one of the more prominent trans voices in the industry.
People are always saying that the industry's dying, but you're proof that it's not. Can you kind of give us your thoughts on why people think this way and why it's not so much dying as it is changing?
I think, well, it's based on bad information. That's the first thing. No, the industry is not dying. We took a bump because of the pandemic, but now last few months, sales have almost gotten up to 2019 levels, which was the highest sales that the mainstream portion of the comic industry has had ever. Like, we're doing over $1 billion in business, and that's just in the dollars that are being reported by ICV2, covering North American comic shops and some booksellers. That doesn't include companies like Little Brown and First Second and Penguin, who have these massive division, graphic novels divisions.
Scholastic too as well.
Scholastic is the largest comic book company in the world. Raina Telgemeier is the highest selling creator in comics, and most of the people who only read superheroes never even heard of her. Superhero comics, for the most part, or at least the mainstream Marvel, DC comics, for a very long time were geared towards middle-aged men who are willing to walk into a comic book shop every week to get their comic books. That's not what kids do. Kids don't do that anymore. Kids go to bookstores. Kids go to Scholastic. Kids go to buy stuff online. They read web comics. My daughter reads comics. My daughter loves Dogman. She loves Raina's work. She loves Lincoln Pierce. That's the stuff that she's reading. She's just starting to get into manga. She's not going. We have a comic shop like 3 blocks from my house. She won't go in there by herself. She'll go in there with me.
Right.
She won't go in there by herself because I don't think she feels as comfortable going into Galaxy by herself as she is with me, because that's my generation.
Right. Yeah.
The guys who go into that shop are guys my age.
Now, what do you think companies like Marvel and DC could do better in terms of not only the diversity, but also maybe educating the ignorant? Do you think that companies like that have a duty to use their platform?
Well, I think I know DC is starting to do. They're doing very well with their young adult line, and I think that's part of the reason why they made Marie Javins editor in chief. Right. They've done incredibly well with those books. Sell very, very well, and I think that it's okay for a company like a Marvel or a DC to have, and there's a marketing term called multiple points of entry. It's okay for them to have a kid's version of Batman, a young adult version of Batman, and the monthly Batman comic as a loss leader for those trades that as kids get older, they pick up those books later on if that's something that interests them. But and I know Marvel is starting to try to do the same thing as well. I think, I don't know if they have a responsibility, because it's not really their responsibility to educate readers. I don't feel it's really their responsibility to educate readers on that level, just because you have to be able to open yourself up to experience, and if you're not willing to open yourself up to experience, you're not going to. Right. And that's just for all things, all areas of life. You're not going to open yourself up if you set in your mind that things have to be a certain way, positive or negative. Yeah,
absolutely. And on that note, it is unfortunate, but our time has come to an end. And I know I wish I had 50 more questions. I've been really enjoying this interview so far. But I wanted to get a closer look of that Superman artwork that you've been.
Oh no, absolutely.
That is amazing. Now, if you want to own this incredible piece of art, check out the auction link in the description below. All the proceeds from the sale of this piece will go towards Hero Initiative. Jamal, I want to thank you so much for being cornered with us today. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you for having me. Again, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching Drawn and Cornered. Make sure to like, subscribe, hit the little bell icon to get notified for future episodes.